Hi hobby friends. Words, man, like, what do they even mean? I was originally planning for this video to be all about the application of that color wheel business I spoke about in the last color theory video, but as I was putting together my thoughts, I realized we weren't going to get anywhere if we didn't have a common language. And generally, I've been bandying about color terms in my videos like we all know and agree on what they mean. So while I paint up these Eldar Guardians, let's talk about talking about color. Preamble and disclaimer. Before we really get underway, we have to address a couple of general points. Firstly, color theory is a massive and very complicated field. It combines physics, chemistry, perception, psychology, and a million other things. And yet it's also something everyone with sight interacts with every day. So if I don't cover your particular corner of the color discourse, or I say something that doesn't ring true with your understanding, my apologies. YouTube has blessed and cursed us with the comments section down below to get into the weeds over things like that, so feel free to chat away in there. Also, almost all of the words I'm going to use today occupy two spaces, their everyday usage and their narrow technical usage, and both of those are completely valid. I use some of these terms in their parochial sense frequently, but it's also important to know the narrower definition as well, so we can talk accurately about color when we need to. Okay, that's enough preamble, let's look at word number one. Hue. And we are starting big. This is, for my money anyway, the core property of a color. This is the green in pale green, the blue in sky blue. If you want one portion of the really technical definition, this is the angle of a color on the color wheel. Usually, for standard RGB CMY models, red sits at 0 degrees, green at 120, and blue at 240. But honestly, as a mini painter, I don't know if there's much you want to do with that kind of information. If you're calibrating a high-end lighting fixture or working at a dyes and pigments manufacturer, sure, it's useful stuff. Painting an ultramarine though? Probably not so important to know what degree that blue is on a given color model. Where the term hue really does come in handy though is as a conceptual tool, because these two swatches are different colors, but they share the same hue. And when you see a color out in the real world, or maybe more commonly for us sci-fi and fantasy colorists, in your head, and you want to reproduce that color on your little war person, well, the first thing you have to get right is the hue. You have to face the right way before you can start walking to your destination. Sidebar quickly on the other major usage of hue that you'll see. On some paints, the artist type paints anyway, you might see something like cadmium yellow hue or Prussian blue hue. All this means is they've gotten to the same color as you get from cadmium or ferrocyanide or whatever, but they've used different pigments. Normally because the original pigment is very poisonous or expensive. But back to the main point, if these swatches share the same hue, why do they look so different? Saturation. Because a color is not just its hue, oh no. The next axis to look at is saturation, and while there are some technical definitions that are so brain-frazzling they would put even a 9th ed 40k terrain rules writer to shame, I think I'll be cheeky here and give you what I think is the most useful definition. Saturation is how colory the color is. That is to say, how blue the blue is, how cyan the cyan is. Sure, this swatch is red, but this swatch is undeniably redder. If you have a smartphone, and chances are you do, you can open up your photo app and have an interactive demonstration of what saturation is by fiddling with the appropriately named slider. So, saturation can tell us how much oomph there is in a color, and it can also help us plot out our color schemes and mix colors too. I won't dive too deeply into the details today, but one common, well, let's call it a mistake, but I don't really like that word, you see people make when they come up with color schemes is to use way too many saturated colors. Save the punch for a few key details and you'll always end up with a more coherent scheme. There are exceptions, of course, but it's a good rule of thumb for sure. Okay, time to close off the trifecta of core color terms with value. The value, also called the lightness, which is technically different but doesn't need to be for our purposes, is the axis with pure white at one end and pure black at the other. But that axis doesn't have to pass through a perfectly saturated version of our hue, right? Nor does it have to go through a hueless grey, which is why value gets an axis all of its own and isn't just a function of saturation. Value is how much light the color is reflecting back at you. Imagine you have a really dark green object and a paler, less saturated green object, and you're in a room with a dimmable light. If you twiddle the dimmer switch, you'll be affecting the value of those chosen colors. The paler object will always be reflecting more of the light though, so its local color can be said to have a higher value. One interesting thing to note is that more saturated colors will keep more of their, let's say, essential quality at those different values than desaturated ones. This is why, if you want gorgeous shadows and highlights, you can't just add black and white. Adding black and white will adjust your value, yes, but it will also adjust your saturation. And if you want highlights that sing and shadows that are rich, you need to think about adjusting your value without losing saturation. But that really is a topic for next time. Okay, those are the big three, not an exhaustive list, and in the end it's just a model for talking about color, but I think it's pretty robust and it allows us to talk about colors in a fairly objective way. But before we take a look at the finished product with these little space elves, let's do a lightning round for some more terms you might hear when talking color. Temperature. Basically put, if you draw a line between magenta and green, the stuff at the top of the wheel is warm and the stuff at the bottom of the wheel is cool. But where color temperature in painting becomes really interesting is when you start talking about relative color temperature. It's a big topic, I've done a video on it before, but I think I want to revisit the subject. Tones, shades, and tints. This is a really classic canvas artist take on color, and it is super useful and practical. Take a color, add black, now you have the shade of that color. Add white, you have the tint. Add gray, and you'll get the tones. If you squint and don't worry about the details, shade and tint are kind of like adjusting value, and tones represent the saturation scale of a color, sort of, but that's translating one model's terms onto another in a not wholly correct or practical sense. These three words are also super prone to loose use. I, and almost everyone, will often use tone as basically synonymous with the word color, and tint to refer to adding a little bit of any color to any other color, so a blue tinted green, for example. And of course, GW and Citadel paints have folk thinking shade means a watered down semi-transparent acrylic paint. Words are slippery like that. Object color or local color. I'm chucking this one in because when we get back to talking about light at some point, this will become really important. The local color of a thing is its true color, if you like. If you put that thing in a room and lit it perfectly evenly from all sides with no shadows and with a completely neutral light, you'd be seeing its local or object color. Take that thing out into the real world where the light has its own color and other objects are bouncing other wavelengths around and light intensity varies across the shadows and highlights of the object, and well, now you might not even be seeing its local color at all. And there are a million and one more words and terms that we could look at, but I think that will do us for now. We've built a strong foundation for talking about color. Just a quick reminder that I have a wonderful, supportive, good-looking, eloquent, talented, kind, magnanimous, generous, and wise bunch of patrons over on Patreon, and I am always and forever grateful to them. And you too can join them, or come and hang out in the Discord by following the links below. A like, comment, and share is a great way to let the great algorithm in the cloud know that you thought this was an interesting video too, so why not give those buttons a click? And there we are, 30 Guardians all done up. This scheme is basically a combo of my Harlequin scheme and my go-to white recipe, so check out the Murder Clown video and the Tau Commander video on my channel if you want the lowdown on the how-to. Cheers for watching, and I will see you next time.